Something happened behind closed doors last night that no one in your soulmate's family was prepared for. A conversation they had avoided for far too long could no longer be postponed. One person entered that room carrying a truth that had been buried beneath silence, pride, and fear. And when your name was finally spoken, the entire atmosphere changed. Listen carefully, because what happened next may explain why so many things between you and your soulmate never made sense. The family had not gathered for an ordinary conversation. There was no celebration waiting for them, no casual dinner, no laughter filling the room. One by one, they arrived after receiving the same unexpected request: everyone needed to be present. Your soulmate was there too, but something about them was different. They were unusually quiet, watching every person who entered as though they already suspected that this meeting was connected to something from the past. Something unfinished. Something involving you. For several minutes, nobody wanted to begin. The silence became heavier with every passing second. Your soulmate's mother kept looking toward the person who had called everyone together, waiting for an explanation. Another family member finally asked why they had all been brought there so suddenly. The person standing near the center of the room hesitated, looked directly at your soulmate, and said that there was something the family should have discussed a long time ago. Something they had allowed to remain hidden because speaking about it would force certain people to admit what they had done. Your soulmate immediately became alert. They asked what this was really about. The person did not answer immediately. Instead, they reached into their bag and placed something on the table. It was not money. It was not a wedding invitation. It was not anything anyone expected to see. It was something connected to a decision that had been made when you and your soulmate were still emotionally connected. And suddenly, two people in that room looked extremely uncomfortable. Your soulmate noticed. They asked again, more firmly this time, "Why are we here?" That was when the person finally said your name. Everything stopped. Your soulmate stared at them as though they had just opened a door that everyone else had spent years trying to keep closed. One family member immediately tried to interrupt, saying there was no reason to bring the past into the present. But the person who had called the meeting refused to remain silent anymore. They said the past had never truly disappeared because your soulmate had been living with the consequences of it every single day. Then came the first confession. The person admitted that your soulmate had never been told the complete truth about why you disappeared from certain conversations, why communication became difficult, and why circumstances seemed to change so suddenly between the two of you. Your soulmate had been allowed to believe one version of events while another version remained hidden inside the family. Your soulmate looked around the room. Nobody wanted to meet their eyes. And that silence told them something before another word was even spoken. Don't skip this moment, because this was where the family meeting changed completely. Your soulmate asked one simple question: what was I never told? The person took a slow breath and revealed that there had once been a conversation about you that your soulmate never knew had happened. Certain family members had discussed your connection without either of you being present. Opinions were formed. Assumptions were made. And someone had convinced the others that separating the two of you would eventually make everything easier. But it didn't. Instead, your soulmate spent months questioning why something that once felt so real had suddenly become so complicated. They wondered whether you had changed. They wondered whether they had misunderstood your feelings. At times, they even blamed themselves. Yet according to the person speaking last night, there had always been another piece of the story. Your soulmate's expression changed when they heard this. Not because every answer had been revealed yet, but because they suddenly realized their memories were beginning to connect differently. Moments that once seemed random no longer felt random. Certain warnings from relatives. Certain conversations that happened at suspicious times. Certain messages that never received the response they expected. Certain decisions they had been encouraged to make when they were emotionally vulnerable. Your soulmate turned toward one particular person in the room and asked, "Did you know about this?" No answer. They asked again. Still silence. Then the person who had called everyone together said something even more serious. They didn't just know. They were part of the reason it happened. Your soulmate stood up. The room erupted. One person insisted that everything had been done to protect the family. Another argued that they had believed your soulmate would eventually move forward and forget about you. Someone else said they had never agreed with what happened but had been too afraid to challenge the others. Your soulmate barely listened. They wanted only one thing now. The complete truth. They looked at the person who had finally spoken about you and asked them not to hide another detail, no matter how painful it might be. That person nodded. Then they pointed toward the object sitting on the table and told your soulmate to open it. Your soulmate reached for it slowly. Their hands were trembling. Because whatever was inside had apparently been kept away from them for a very long time. And when they finally opened it, their face changed completely. It contained proof that you had not been remembered the way certain people claimed. There had been an attempt to reach out. There had been words meant for your soulmate. There had been something they were supposed to know. But somehow, it had never reached them. Your soulmate read everything in complete silence. Then they looked up with tears forming in their eyes and asked the question nobody in that room wanted to answer. Who kept this from me? And this time, someone finally whispered a name. The name that was whispered into that room changed everything. Your soulmate did not react immediately. For several seconds, they simply stood there, holding the proof in their hands, staring at the person whose name had just been spoken. It was someone they had trusted. Someone whose advice they had accepted during some of the most confusing moments of their life. Someone who had repeatedly told them that walking away from you was the only sensible choice. Now, for the first time, your soulmate was beginning to understand that those words may never have been neutral advice at all. The person tried to defend themselves almost immediately, insisting that everyone was misunderstanding what had happened, but your soulmate raised their hand and asked them to stop. They did not want another explanation designed to make everything sound harmless. They wanted facts. They wanted dates. They wanted to know exactly what had been said about you, what had been hidden, and why nobody had ever given them the chance to decide for themselves. The person who had finally exposed the truth moved closer to the table and revealed that this was not the only thing that had been kept from your soulmate. There had been another conversation, another decision, and another piece of information that could completely change how your soulmate remembered the ending between you. At that moment, the entire family became restless. One relative begged them not to continue. Another said there was no reason to destroy relationships over something that happened long ago. But your soulmate turned toward them with an expression nobody had seen before. They said, "It may have happened long ago for you, but I have been carrying the consequences ever since." Nobody answered. Your soulmate continued, saying that every time they had tried to understand why you became distant, they had been given another explanation. Every time they considered reaching out, someone had reminded them why they supposedly should not. Every time their heart pulled them back toward you, they had been made to feel foolish for still caring. Now they wanted to know whether any of those explanations had actually been true. The person responsible finally began speaking. They admitted that they had believed they were protecting your soulmate from uncertainty. They said they were afraid the relationship would create complications inside the family, and they convinced themselves that distance would eventually solve everything. But your soulmate immediately asked the question that exposed the deepest problem: why didn't you let me choose? The person had no convincing answer. Your soulmate asked why messages had been kept from them. Why conversations about you had happened without them. Why people had decided what your intentions were without allowing your soulmate to hear those intentions directly from you. The person lowered their eyes and admitted that once the first interference happened, telling the truth became harder. Every new decision had been made to protect the previous one. One hidden conversation became two. One misleading explanation required another. Eventually, too many people knew fragments of what had happened, but nobody wanted to be the first person to expose the entire story. That admission hurt your soulmate more than anger ever could. They sat down slowly, looking at the object still resting in their hands, and began reading again. The words connected to you suddenly carried a completely different meaning. Something your soulmate had once interpreted as silence now looked like an effort they had never been allowed to see. Something they had interpreted as rejection now appeared incomplete. Their eyes filled again, but this time they refused to look away. They wanted to absorb every word because they understood that this might be the closest they had come in years to seeing the situation without somebody else's interpretation standing between the two of you. Then they noticed something at the bottom, something small that nobody else had mentioned yet. A date. Your soulmate stared at it for several seconds before asking when this had actually arrived. Nobody answered immediately. That silence was enough. Your soulmate calculated the date and suddenly realized that this had reached the family during one of the most important periods of your connection. It had arrived before a decision they had made. Before a conversation that changed everything. before they finally convinced themselves that you no longer wanted to fight for what existed between you. Your soulmate stood again and asked why they had been told nothing had come from you. The person responsible tried to explain that they had expected another message to follow. They assumed that if your feelings were strong enough, you would find another way. But your soulmate rejected that excuse immediately. They said nobody had the right to secretly create a test that you never knew you were taking. Nobody had the right to intercept one attempt and then use the absence of another as proof that you did not care enough. That sentence silenced the entire room. Your soulmate's mother began crying quietly. Until that moment, she had said very little, but now she admitted that she had suspected there was more to the story. She remembered your soulmate becoming withdrawn during that period. She remembered them asking questions nobody seemed willing to answer directly. She remembered hearing your name late at night when your soulmate believed nobody was listening. And she remembered the day your soulmate finally said they were going to stop waiting for an explanation. She had assumed they were simply accepting reality. Now she understood that the reality they had accepted may have been carefully shaped by other people. Don't skip what happened next, because your soulmate did something nobody expected. They stopped questioning the person who had hidden the truth and turned toward every family member in the room. They asked anyone who knew anything else about you to speak immediately. No more protecting each other. No more deciding what information was too painful. No more waiting until another year passed. If there was anything else, any conversation, message, meeting, warning, promise, or decision involving you, they wanted it revealed before anyone left that room. At first, nobody moved. Then one older relative slowly raised their head and said, "There is something else." Your soulmate froze. The relative explained that shortly after everything began falling apart, someone close to the family had seen you. It had not been a planned meeting. It happened unexpectedly, and during that encounter, your name and your soulmate's name came up together. According to the relative, you had asked a question that was later repeated inside the family, but it had never been repeated to your soulmate. Your soulmate leaned forward and asked what you had said. The relative hesitated, then revealed that you had wanted to know whether your soulmate had truly made the decision to let everything go, or whether that decision had been influenced by pressure around them. Your soulmate covered their mouth. That question meant you had been confused too. You had not necessarily understood what was happening on their side. For years, your soulmate had carried the belief that you understood their decision and simply chose not to challenge it. But now they were learning that both of you may have been standing on opposite sides of the same confusion, each waiting for clarity that never arrived. The realization was devastating. Your soulmate walked toward the window and stood there silently. Nobody interrupted them. The family finally understood that this was no longer an argument about the past. Your soulmate was grieving possibilities, the conversations that never happened, the questions that never reached the right person, and the choices that might have been different if everyone had simply stepped aside and allowed two people to speak honestly. After a long silence, your soulmate turned back and asked, "What answer was given to you?" The older relative looked uncomfortable. They admitted that you had been told your soulmate had already moved on completely and did not want the past reopened. Your soulmate shook their head immediately. That wasn't true. 3 words. But they landed harder than everything else spoken that night. Your soulmate admitted that at that exact time, they had still been thinking about you constantly. They had still been wondering whether you would reach out. They had still been secretly hoping that one honest conversation could explain everything. Yet somewhere outside their knowledge, you were being told the opposite. The family suddenly understood how completely the connection had been trapped between assumptions and interference. Then your soulmate asked something unexpected. Did you believe it? The relative said they could not know exactly what was in your heart, but they remembered your reaction. You had gone quiet. You had asked whether those words came directly from your soulmate. And when the relative could not honestly say yes, you had simply replied that you wished your soulmate had told you personally. Your soulmate broke down. Not loudly. Not dramatically. They simply lowered their head as tears fell onto the pages they were still holding. Because those words touched the exact wound they had carried themselves. They had wished the same thing. They had wished you had spoken directly. And now they were realizing that perhaps both of you had wanted the same conversation while other voices kept standing in the middle. But the meeting was still not finished. The person who had originally called everyone together walked toward your soulmate and said there was one final detail they needed to know before deciding what to do next. They had waited until now because they were unsure whether revealing it would help or cause even more pain. Your soulmate looked at them and said there was nothing left to protect them from. They wanted everything. The person reached back into the bag. This time, they removed a sealed envelope. Unlike the first item, this one had never been opened. And written across the front, in unmistakable handwriting, was your soulmate's full name. The person placed it gently on the table and said, "This was meant for you. And after all these years, I think you should be the one who decides whether to open it." Your soulmate stared at the envelope. Then they noticed something written in smaller letters beneath their name. A short sentence. Only a few words. But the moment they read it, their hands began trembling again. Because that sentence made one thing terrifyingly clear. Whatever you had tried to tell them back then was far more important than anyone in that room had realized. Your soulmate held that sealed envelope for what felt like forever, knowing that opening it could completely change the story they had believed for years. The room remained silent as they finally broke the seal and unfolded the pages inside. The first words stopped them cold. What you had written was not anger, blame, or a goodbye. It was an explanation. You had tried to tell them that you never wanted confusion, family pressure, or other people's opinions to become the final voice in your connection. As your soulmate continued reading, tears filled their eyes. The letter revealed that you had been waiting for one honest conversation. You had wanted to hear the truth directly from them instead of believing what everyone else was saying. Then your soulmate reached the sentence that changed everything. You had never asked them to choose between you and their family. You had only wanted them to choose honesty over assumptions. Your soulmate slowly looked around the room. Suddenly, years of unanswered questions had an explanation. They realized that both of you had been carrying different versions of the same heartbreak. The person who had hidden the truth tried to apologize, but your soulmate quietly said, "I need time." There was no shouting anymore. The truth itself had become louder than any argument could have been. Your soulmate folded the letter carefully instead of leaving it behind. That small action surprised everyone because it showed that your words mattered to them even after all this time. Then your soulmate asked one final question: "Does anyone know how I can reach you?" Nobody expected that. One family member slowly admitted that they might know someone who could help. Your soulmate immediately asked them not to interfere this time. No messages through relatives. No interpretations. No decisions made by anyone else. If a conversation happened, your soulmate wanted it to be between you and them. Before leaving the room, they looked back at the family and said, "Whatever happens next, I need to hear the truth directly." That meeting did not magically erase the past. It could not return the lost years or guarantee what the future would become. But it gave your soulmate something they had been denied for far too long: the freedom to make their own decision with the complete truth in front of them. And somewhere deep inside, one question was now impossible for them to ignore. What if the story between you and your soulmate never truly ended? What if it was simply interrupted? Because last night, after the family finally spoke about you, your soulmate walked away carrying that old letter close to their heart. And for the first time in years, they were no longer asking everyone else what they should believe about you. They were preparing to find out for themselves.